Unfortunately, by the strictest definition of what a human being is, white people are just below human beings.
That was Nota Baloyi, a well-known South African music executive, entrepreneur, and social media personality. He not only calls white people Neanderthals, but also calls for the slaughter of white people in South Africa if they, in his words, do not assimilate, whatever that means. A lot of stuff happening in South Africa.
Kill the poor, the farmer.
Julius Malema recently sang Kill the Boer not too long ago during Human Rights Day. Donald Trump has extended refugee status to white Afrikaners. That all 30 years since the birth of the new South Africa, 30 years after the world celebrated the end of apartheid and the creation of the so-called Rainbow Nation. My question today is, whatever happened to the ideals of that multiracial, multicultural society, democracy in South Africa? Now, my guest is also familiar with racist remarks, if I may say so, and was in fact booted out of Parliament and party for just that. He's the well-known South African YouTuber, political commentator, and ex-member of Parliament for the Democratic Alliance, Renaldo Gouws. Renaldo, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Johan, and it's an absolute honor to be here. Thank you.
Let's start with this, Renaldo. South Africa is back in the international spotlight. Maybe not such a good thing. I'm reminded by an ex-South African ambassador who told me that we were in the news on a daily basis during the days of apartheid. And as we became the new democracy, we somehow disappeared. The world seemed to have forgotten about South Africa. And in the meantime, we seem to be back in the spotlight again. And much of that based on what happened in Washington, based on Donald Trump's executive order. I want to talk to you about a lot of stuff in my mind. I want to talk to you about this man, Baloyi's statement that has recently caused some upset on social media, etc. But I also want to talk to you about where we are today, because I think the international community is also somewhat confused. What is happening in South Africa? But first, let's get back to Baloyi and his social media interview that he gave, and calling you a Neanderthal man and calling me a Neanderthal man. Just give me your reaction on that.
Well, I mean, firstly, it's just absurd. You know, I mean, especially, look, I think South Africans didn't pretty much take as much offense as I would think that the rest of the world did when it eventually, went onto the international stage. This is something that a lot of white South Africans have become accustomed to in South Africa. So it's not, it's not Nota. It's the fact that here is another individual that's got extremist views about white people. And it's not so much about the insults. It's rather about the lack of consequences or this double standard that is existing in South Africa. And we can talk about my video, the thing that made me get my membership terminated with the DA. But just to respond to this, I think that it's laughable. I mean, look, technically, if you want to go back, the cradle of mankind stems just above Pretoria. So I don't think that he was thinking about that when he made the comment. But yeah, I mean, calling millions of white people around the world, I mean, billions, calling them Neanderthals. And I think the thing here is not so much that statement. It's the fact that he said you should treat them like dogs. Now, there's a lot of hoo-ha about, this white genocide. And let me just make it very clear. There is no white genocide in South Africa as of what is today's date, the 3rd of April, I believe. And the issue, however, is if you look at what happens before an eventual genocide, I think that is what is really concerning a lot of people. And one of the stages, of course, is to belittle and dehumanize people. And I mean, what a better way to dehumanize somebody than to say, hey, you are in actual fact not a human. And that is exactly what he did. And he's one of many prominent South Africans that is making these claims and belittling and insulting white people. And nothing seems to happen to these individuals. And I think that is what what the issue is that we just want a very transparent and equal society where everybody is treated the same way.
White people came here. They need to assimilate to our culture, not the other way around. It's bad enough we speak their language with a proficiency that they cannot even muster. But they still need to assimilate to our culture. They need to assimilate to Ubuntu. That's the only way in which we can coexist within this environment. Otherwise, we will slaughter all of them, drive them to the sea, literally.
Is this new, or is this something that you've learned to live with?
I think that it's new for a lot of South Africans that might not be on social media, specifically X. I'm not talking about your Facebook, even though it's becoming far more prominent on Facebook too. Facebook is like the huisgenoot of social medias. It's where everybody just goes and shows their family photos. And then you start getting Instagram that is more for the young people. You get TikTok that is literally for young people. But it's got a massive support base amongst white people and specifically Afrikaners in South Africa. Now, this type of hatred has always mostly been predominantly on social media. But the more connected people get with social media in South Africa, the more they find these type of utterings. If you are specifically on X, which I think is probably the out of all the social media is the most toxic when it comes to race relations, if you want to put it that way. And on a daily basis there, you will hear that you are a racist, you're a settler, you're a pink pig. So in essence, to answer your question, it's always been there, specifically since social media came into existence in about 2006, 2007. But it's definitely, the more people get connected, the more they become aware of, how severe it actually is.
Yeah, two things about that. People say stupid stuff, and we know that. And I think I'm not wrong if I suggest to you that you probably also said stupid stuff that got you into hot water. So that's one view of it, the stupid stuff that we do say, and especially on social media. What's relevant to me and important to me is how much of this is felt by the majority or the masses out there. In other words, how reflective is that what he's saying to the average or perhaps certain sectors in the black community?
So I would say the vast majority of South Africa seem to just want to get along. They want the country to work. They want electricity. They want their water. They want street lights to be repaired. So I think the vast majority of South Africans, irrespective of whether you are poor, whether you are very wealthy, whether you are white, black, colored, Indian, the thing is the vast majority understand that we are a multicultural society. They understand that, you have to give and take, you have to be open to different experiences. And I would say that social media in South Africa, I would say it's about 15% of people that in South Africa that are on social media, so roughly about 10 million people. So you can get a kind of a taste, but I do think though that social media amplifies it. So I don't think that's how the majority of people feel, but I would say that there definitely is a rise with regards to this, and it's on both sides. It's on the extreme left, which is your MK, your EFF, your Black First, Land First, like Andile and Latama, which I know that you hosted before. And then on the extreme right, your Bittereinders. But of course, the Bittereinders and the racism, I would say, coming from the right is a lot smaller than the racism from the left, purely because of the demographics of this country.
My question really is, how concerned should we be? Is this something that's on the rise? Is it getting hotter in South Africa in terms of this kind of stuff? And what is government doing about that? How does government react to that? Or is there absolutely, it's freedom of speech, I guess, to a certain extent, but there's no reaction from government. There's nobody that kind of try to hold him a little bit back or anything like that. It's allowed. How concerned should we be?
I would say, it is definitely increasing exponentially every single year. I think it's reached that point where I would start getting worried about what you read on social media. And the reason I say this is because a couple of days ago, or actually last week, the Constitutional Court refused to listen, or they refused to leave to appeal for the Kill the Boer song. Now, to illustrate what you're saying with regards to the government is not interested in dealing with how minorities feel in South Africa. And the reason I say this is because when I mention the government, I'm referring to the ANC. So the ANC, you have to look at the election. And sorry, this might be a long explanation, but I want to get into the detail of it because it's an important question. The ANC government, for the first time in our democracy, fell below 50%. In actual fact, they fell just short of 40%. Now, the ANC, as to their credit, have tried to ensure some kind of stability, some kind of, we have to look at the legacy of apartheid and ensure that we uplift our people, which is, the black individuals. And they've said it many times. They say our people, and there's no issue with that. I understand for a revolutionary movement to do that. But when the ANC saw that MK, which is obviously a far more radical party, and the EFF, which is a far more radical party, starting to take their voters away from them, internally, I believe that the ANC started saying, hey, we need to start getting a little bit more radical. And that is why you're starting to see the NHI, the Bella Act. You are starting to see expropriation, the Expropriation Act, and the threat of expropriation without compensation. So the ANC is getting their cues, it looks like, from social media, because they are the ones that are. The president didn't even want to condemn Julius Malema singing Kill the Boer on Human Rights Day. Now, anywhere else in the world, if you hear a political leader, of a political party leader and a member of parliament singing a song about killing people, it'll be condemned. But in South Africa, our president and our government does not seem to have an issue with it. So to answer your question, yes, I would start getting really worried, because if these type of actions are not facing any consequences, then people feel emboldened to do more. And then it's more. And then it's the next thing. So it's a snowball effect.
Shoot to kill. Yamaza. Kill the poor. The farmer. Kill the poor. The farmer. Brr, pa. Pa. Brr, pa.
I guess what I'm also trying to figure out, Renaldo, is whether the most recent events, the executive order of Donald Trump, AfriForum and Solidarity going to the White House, claiming there that there is a genocide being committed in South Africa. I'm not quite sure if they actually claimed that, but that's what you read in the papers. Whether all of this is suddenly, I get the impression from here of a sudden escalation, that the temperatures have really gone up. And then when I go on social media, I see images of some young black thugs, if I may call a spade, attacking people in the city centre of Bloemfontein, for example. And I see violent images like that recently, a day or two ago, on News 24. So when you sit here far away from South Africa, there is a sense of kind of a creeping sense of anxiety that overcome ones if you sit and look at the situation. Do you experience that as well, or are we here far away from the fire just overreacting?
No, I would say, let me put it like this. The testing the waters is taking place now. So, if I walk out my house, do I have people starting to scream at me and, accuse me of being white? No, my daily interaction in South Africa is 100% most days, not even focused on race. I interact with a petrol pump attendant that might be black, might be white. I interact with people that might be colored in a shopping center, various different races, and there's smiles and everybody is happy. However, social media is definitely influencing it. But now, let me use something that you just said as the third force that I would say is definitely causing a lot of hatred in this country, and that is mainstream media. So to just correct you on something that you said, AfriForum, Solidariteit, Adams Roots, Kali Kriel, myself, and every single, even Steve Hofmeyr, to an extent, has never ever said that there's a white genocide taking place in South Africa. They said that farm murders is an issue. They said that farmers are 3 times more likely to be murdered than a police officer in South Africa. Now, what mainstream media has done is they've created this narrative of this white genocide and it being said by AfriForum, etc. So mainstream media, I would say, is actively more trying to rage farm, and what that means is trying to get people to click on their articles and trying to sell newspapers by the headlines that they run. So what this, of course, is causing is people see that, let's use the EFF as an example. So Julius Malema sees that nobody's interested in his speech when he talks about the economy of the country and what they plan to do. The moment he starts saying radical things about white people, every single media house is there and they are covering it. And then that gives airtime for the EFF, it gives airtime for Julius Malema. Now apply this to every single person in this country that either want to aspire to become a politician, that want to aspire to be a leader, or just to get out of a situation that they might be in and to improve their financial standing. Then these type of things happen. And I personally put a lot of blame of the current race, the way that racism is treated in South Africa and the way that it is reported on. I blame that a lot on mainstream media, giving it a lot more attention than it deserves. And before you ask your next question, there are many studies that have been done by various different groups. It could be the Free Market Foundation, it could be AfriForum and various others. And when they are asked what is the top 10 issues in facing you as an individual in this country, it's always crime, it's always unemployment, it's always access to running water, drinking clean water, and then about 8th, 9th is racism. Even if it even features in the top 10. So the vast majority of South Africans aren't affected by racism. But if you go onto social media, or you go and switch on the television, or you go to a news website, what is the most things that you always read? It's racism. So just to put it into context a little bit.
I hear what you say. Let me tell you the questions I get here. I had a chat with Professor Piet Krokant about 2-3 weeks ago around this theme as well. Perceptions have changed about South Africa if one looks from the outside. We come from, I remember back in the 90s when South Africa became a democracy. I was foreign correspondent here in Europe, and I remember how Europe and Holland and Amsterdam celebrated this moment of great freedom for South Africa. The birth of the multiracial, multi-ethnic, multicultural democracy in South Africa. That was really, we called it the multiculti society that South Africa was the best example of to the world out there after all these years of apartheid, after all these years of pain and unfair discrimination and all of this, suddenly the burst on the world stage of this multicultural ideal. That seems to have changed if we look from the outside. That seems to be a dream that has, in the meantime, simply collapsed. If you walk on the streets here in Amsterdam, if I take a taxi to go to the city now and the taxi driver recognizes my accent and asks me where I'm from, and I tell him I'm a South African, the very first thing he would say to me, "Oh, is that the country where the white people are being discriminated against?"
Yeah.
Now, my question is, and that's, how did it happen, or how does it happen that the people who were supposed to be guilty of creating the apartheid system has now become the victim? How did that happen? And that's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is that if this perception is being created worldwide already, that in particular, the white Afrikaner is the victim now of discrimination, such a reverse role from where we come from, how would that affect black people in South Africa? If you were a black man, how would you feel if this group of Afrikaans people go to Washington and tell Washington that they're being discriminated against? How does that affect the temperature in South Africa?
So that's a brilliant question, and I am going to take my time to answer this if you don't mind, because I've been for many years I've been thinking about this, trying to understand. They have that saying: if you're not liberal when you're young, you don't have a heart. If you're not conservative when you're 40, you don't have a brain. So I've tried to put myself into the shoes. So let me give you an example, and I'm going to try the best that I can do. I'm not really good with examples, but here we go. I think things started going wrong in this country when the next generation of young white people, colored people, Indian people, and black people started going, but what do we have to do with this? You know? And the problem that you are facing with that is it's easy for an individual like you and an individual like me and our different age groups to have our opinions, but we aren't the born frees. We aren't the individuals that were born after apartheid ended. So I completely understand that black people, colored people, and Indian people were treated horrendously during apartheid. It was an atrocious system. It was right that it was condemned. And a lot of people have a lot of opinions about Nelson Mandela and what the ANC did during that time. But like the saying goes, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter.
Yeah.
And we can definitely see that the ANC bent over backwards to try and accommodate the National Party government before they started doing what they did. And I'm not condoning the killing of innocent people, but, like with everything, you understand that wars and fighting a system, it's very difficult to comprehend. And it's easy to be a referee after the fact and say this was right and this was wrong. When it comes to South Africa specifically, I think that there's a lot of young South Africans that, especially if you look at it now, that look at the state of South Africa. Now, as a young white individual in 2025, you've got 142 race-based laws that discriminate against you purely because you are white. And we can go into the technicalities of what is a race law, and I'm sure a lot of people will have an argument. But for the sake of clarity, if there is a law, and somewhere in that act or in that law, it states that the composition of something needs to be like this because of a broad representation, then it's a racial law. So I'm dealing with facts. I'm not dealing with feelings, And what has happened is if you are a 20-year-old young white South African, you've got to face employment equity. You've got to face affirmative action. You've got to face, even if you want to start your own business and do contracts with the government, you have to ensure that your business is broad-based, Black Economic Empowerment compliant, BEE compliant. And there's a lot of young white South Africans that are looking at that going, but why? I understand that my parents might have had a privilege. I understand that my grandparents might have had a privilege, but I haven't. Because a lot of young white South Africans aren't born with the retirement fund, money to go to university and got land. Unfortunately, that is a misconception that was created by the ANC and various other political parties. So from a white perspective, it is, why am I being judged and criticized and punished for the sins of my fathers and, the grandfathers? Now, from a black perspective, and I'm not a black individual, but I've had many conversations with various people from various different backgrounds when I was in the DA and when I was doing my community work, etc. And the feeling that I get from black individuals is, specifically young black individuals, is the ANC has failed to uplift the majority of people in this country. They have failed to provide them with adequate housing, adequate electricity, adequate water, a community that they can be proud of. Turning townships into suburbs is something that has not
Can I
happened.
just interrupt you? I want you to go back to this, but I want to just ask this question here as well, just before it slips my mind. Those same black people that you tell me about that are criticizing the current ANC government, are they also very conscious of the fact that they do stand first in the row, that they do have these the call it the privileges of black economic empowerment that actually puts them standing first in the row as well? Are they conscious of that as well?
They are conscious. They're conscious of it, but they know that it's not working, and that is the point that I'm leading to. Is the fact that if you look at broad-based Black economic empowerment that was implemented from 2003, you will see that it's enriched a small grouping of people. It has left the vast majority of Black people in similar conditions, maybe a little bit better. And I think this is also where the discussion, might be where you need the input from a Black individual. But from, like I said, many conversations that I've had is anything than apartheid is considered an upgrade. So a granny that used to have to walk 20 kilometers to work now can take a taxi. That is an upgrade. A lady that used to live in a shack, but now she's got an RDP house, that is an upgrade. So the issue comes that whether the upgrade is acceptable according to standards around the world today, and of course it's not, but to that individual that is living in those conditions, for them it is an upgrade, and for them, they feel that their lives have improved. What they don't know is that their lives could have improved a lot more under a competent government. So, and to bring it back to the issue of race, I would say that the vast majority of South Africans, irrespective, even the most racist and of white people and Black people, would have looked at 1994 and said, okay, let's give this a chance. And the first 4 years is obviously rocky, but everybody was still, the Rainbow Nation, let's make it happen. Things started going wrong when these race laws started getting implemented. So you can look at 1998.
Did you say getting wrong, Renaldo? Just say getting wrong for who? White people or Black people?
Wrong in the sense of the racial tensions in South Africa.
Okay.
And eventually you will understand why the EFF has got the support they have and how radical they are, and the same with MK and the same with Black First, Land First, and any other political party that pretty much would use anti-white rhetoric to further their narratives. So the fact that these race-based policies were implemented, you could see that up until 2008, 2009, things were relatively quiet on the race front in South Africa. And then in 2009, 2010, that is when Julius Malema started coming out and singing Kill the Boer publicly again. Now, imagine being, I would say, somebody my age, and you have not gotten a scholarship to the university, even though your grades were good, and you applied for your scholarship for your honorary degree and or for your honors, and you couldn't get it because you're not part of the quota system. And now you hear this individual that has got all these privileges and these opportunities, and they start singing songs about killing you, blaming you, acting like you are the problem when you know that it is due to government failure. And I think that is where the resentment comes from. And I believe that is where a lot of misconceptions come from, specifically on both sides, Black and white. From the Black individual side, I believe that they understand that the government has failed them, but the government keeps on telling them that it's the white man's fault. And they do that through saying it's apartheid's fault. They go back and say it's colonialism's fault. They go back and saying it's Jan van Riebeeck's fault. So if they keep saying that, then you've got your individuals that keep falling for that. And those individuals that don't fall for that, they are then referred to as coconuts. They are referred to as Uncle Toms. And on the white side is obviously you've got Julius Malema singing Kill the Boer. You've got Andile Mngxitama that is asking for the killing of children, women, dogs and cats. So obviously the problem that we are facing here with is that the government is ultimately what has failed the people of South Africa on both sides. And I always have this saying, is where does the legacy of apartheid end and where does the failure of the ANC begin? And until we can have that discussion and understand where we need to move from and whose responsibility it is, then we can turn down the level of racism that is happening, because then more people will understand that it's because of this or it's because of that. But at the moment, it's just a shouting match, and there's not real discussions happening, at least on social media, and definitely not on mainstream media, which is a problem. Because if you look at the way that mainstream media has reported on AfriForum and these individuals going overseas, it's simply not true. And it doesn't take a lot for people to do research and realize, oh, but this is actually not what was said or what the intention of the visit was, etc.
Yeah, no, you've said so much, and I want to try to understand and unpack.
I'm sorry.
When no, it's just that South Africa is so hugely complex. If you look at it from the outside, at least, it is massively confusing and complex. Because what I get to hear from Black people, they talk about the legacy of apartheid that has not been properly investigated, dissected, looked at, and given some place in our hearts, in our minds. I recently spoke to a woman who told me that from the TRC on, the message to us was move on, move on. We were not even allowed to shed our tears. They did not even allow us our tears. That's the one side of the conversation that we get to hear here. The question that then comes in my mind is, have we dealt with apartheid in a proper way? I talk to young people in South Africa, and most recently I spoke to, and I have to admit, it was a fairly right-wing person that I spoke to, but I felt from the young people that I have spoken to a kind of no emotional connection whatsoever with the history of apartheid. Don't understand it. It's not something, and that which they've been told by their parents is not really what the Black people would like them to talk about. It was more about, well, we lived without potholes and the electricity worked and schools functioned and hospitals functioned, et cetera, and in that way was the days of apartheid in some way or another than actually better than for the majority of people. Try to bridge that gap for me in terms of how the Black people of South Africa and the white people of South Africa view this question around our legacy. Have we dealt with that legacy? Have we given it a place in our society, or do we still have a as white people have a responsibility towards our history?
So it's a very good question, and I can see obviously why you've received all your accolades. I mean, because you go to the heart.
I think you see a lot. I think you see a lot of confusion.
So let me be very blunt, and this is a concept that I've had, or a view that I've had, and I've spoken about it at length. I think the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was the biggest farce that we ever saw. And that was the fault of the National Party, and it was the fault of the ANC. The fact that we had a situation where people could come and tell their stories and show how brutal apartheid was. And I do honestly believe that a lot of South Africans don't know how brutal apartheid was. You know, like some people, like you've said, they don't grasp the generational harm that apartheid has caused. Now, listen, I know that I'm starting to sound like a woke leftist, so please stop me if I go a little bit too radical.
I think the truth is a balance.
But you see, this is the thing. It's a problem that we are facing in South Africa because of the media and because of the narrative from the government, is that white people don't understand. When I can guarantee you that a big chunk of white South Africans do completely understand, but the media focuses on those that do not understand or don't want to understand. So to get back to the point, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I believe, in my opinion, I speak for myself, I believe that there should have been a cool-off period after we became a democracy to get all the bearings, to understand what a multicultural society looks like. And then we should have dealt with the issue of, okay, we've now experienced what it's like to have a black person cross you in the street, get onto a bus and share a space with you. Mm-hmm. And you could see the humanity in that individual, because apartheid tried to cause this situation. And, you know, people, I'm interrupting myself, but I want to say this. Many people go and say, well, you know, apartheid was literally just about separation. it was far more than that. You know, people were kicked off of land that they've lived on. South End in Nelson Mandela Bay is a perfect example of that, where the colored community used to live and thrive. It was like the South Africa that we want and love, the multicultural, you know, a pot of that's just overflowing with different cultures. And unfortunately, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was pretty much a way for the National Party to protect their own asses, to ensure that the instructions that they gave to police officers or military individuals to kill people or to brutalize them or to cause harm, those things came out a little bit, but there were no real consequences. There were no, this is going to happen, this was completely unfair. And I do completely understand if the older generation of Black individuals, colored individuals, and Indian individuals feel betrayed, that we didn't deal with that adequately. And I would wholeheartedly agree with those individuals. But what I don't agree with is young individuals that want to act like they knew exactly what went down during apartheid and now want to claim that those struggle credentials for themselves. That is what I've got a problem with, because those are the opportunists that are feeding on people's pain for personal gain.
I want to put up one or two things to you. The kind of discussions that I have here with people in Europe, in Holland specifically. The Dutch were very much engaged in the anti-apartheid movement, as you know. There is a viewpoint that will suggest that South Africa, the creation of the new democracy, the new South Africa, was created in a kind of a relatively vulgar deal, a contract, a buying out of the ideals of the African National Congress. Let me put it to you this way. How do we explain an organization that were well regarded internationally, well respected internationally, founded something like 80 years ago, who fought for the freedom and liberation of their people, to have come to the new democracy, to have made the deal that they've made at CODESA, which it will appear enrich them massively? How do we live with a clean consciousness in the creation of the new South Africa when our very state president, Cyril Ramaphosa, is a billionaire? Is there not a lot of truth in the viewpoint that would suggest that the African National Congress, in fact, in 1990-94, sold out their principles and ideals for a bag of gold, based on basically a corrupt deal, and that lays the foundation for the further development of South Africa? So to conclude what I've just said now, when people say to me, why is South Africa in a mess? One could easily say, well, you deal with 450 years of colonization, followed by 50 years of very, very hard, ruthless apartheid, and then a rough deal sealed with money to create the new South Africa. How much truth is there in what I just said to you now, or understanding for what I'm saying from your viewpoint?
I agree 100%. The ANC lost its way the moment it got access to power, because before then it was...
But were they not bought? My question is, were they not just simply bought? Was South Africa not a transaction, as Julius Malema said here at the Oxford University?
I believe so, yes, because of the communist ties that they had. I mean, they looked after the friends that made sure that they were receiving firearms during, apartheid. And obviously, if you look at how South Africa has grown, and if you look at the companies that are popping up in South Africa, they're either connected to Russia or China. South Africa has got a massive Chinese car manufacturing base in South Africa right now. So you can clearly see that, yes, I'll be honest with you, I wouldn't know too much about the aspect of how, who financed the ANC. But what I do know is that there were definitely individuals or countries and ideologies that supported the ANC. And then after we became a democracy, it moved away from Ubuntu, or from a community aspect and making sure to uplift everybody. And then that is when a lot of cadres and communists were introduced to capitalism and unfortunately to the corrupt aspect of it and self-enrichment. And I think there's no greater example for that than Jacob Zuma. In the way that he sold the country out as early as...
Why is Cyril Ramaphosa not the best example of that? I mean, why is there such a, it appears to me also in the South African media, such a disinterest in how Ramaphosa came to his billions? And many others like Ramaphosa.
So I think it's a good question. I think a lot of people view Jacob Zuma as the start of the failure of this country because under Mbeki, this country was still growing. So you had Nelson Mandela, that was a very good statesman, and it's probably the greatest thing that he ever did was to just serve one term. And then you've got Thabo Mbeki that had his flaws, but at least the economy was growing. I mean, I think we were growing at 6% at one point. Then the failures started happening. You could see a country in which most of the lights worked, most of the traffic lights worked. In South Africa, we call them robots. They worked, the street lights were painted, and you had some sense of basic service delivery. You paid your rates and taxes and you received something in return. Not what you expect, but something. Now, if you look at the Jacob Zuma years, that is when things just completely went haywire. And that is when things like Julius Malema got the platform as the ANC Youth League leader and then eventually got kicked out of the ANC and started the EFF. So I think a lot of people feel it might not be fair, but that is how people feel, is that Jacob Zuma was the cause of South Africa starting to go into these racial aspects again. And I also think it's fair to say that Jacob Zuma, more than anybody else, is the one that wanted to get the radical economic transformation policies implemented in South Africa and wanted the National Democratic Revolution to kick off in South Africa. So I think the reason that people would rather look at Jacob Zuma than Cyril Ramaphosa is because Jacob Zuma is the one that kicked it all off, and Cyril Ramaphosa is more incompetent. And a lot of people look at him and just go, he is always shocked. And it's a very clever tactic because Cyril Ramaphosa is a highly intelligent individual, and he knows exactly what he's doing. I mean, he's the one that out-negotiated the National Party leading up into, our democracy. So he is phenomenally good when it comes to deals. And I think it's just of him, wanting to secure his legacy rather than secure a better future for South Africa. And I think that's why so many people have that issue.
Yeah. How many people in South Africa talk about the facts, and I think they're facts, otherwise prove me wrong, that Ramaphosa was the leader of the National Mine Workers Union, and from the leader of the National Mine Workers Union, and then I go back to the language of Julius Malema again, without any other competencies or skills that he could place on the table, he became a shareholder in a big mining company. Why is that not dubious? Why is that not something that we question? And why is there such a lack of interest? And why I'm asking this, Renaldo, is there are a lot of people that are saying to you that the South Africa you got today is the South Africa that was created between 1992 and 94. That was a South Africa where black economic empowerment was a tool given by white capitalists in the hands of Nelson Mandela to be able to close a deal. And that we are now living the results of that 30 years later.
Yeah, and once again,
corruption begets corruption is what I'm trying to say. That the corruption of South Africa started in the deal that was closed between 1990 and 1992 for the creation of the new South Africa. And black economic empowerment was one of those instruments that was offered by white capital to actually lure Mandela away from the ideas of the Freedom Charter and the more socialist direction that he wanted to push South Africa into. And of course, I understand the collapse of the Soviet Union and how that also influenced the change in thinking. But if we talk about the corruption in South Africa, my argument would be, and this is what I hear when I talk to people here, is that corruption is directly related to the kind of deals that we closed with one another in 1992.
Yeah. So to give it the shortest answer ever, I believe it's white guilt. And let me explain why. The international community knew about apartheid for a very long time, and then eventually it reached fever pitch with people. It wasn't the governments that initially spoke out. It was the people in the streets. It was the protests, and eventually it got the attention of the governments around the world. And I believe that there's two aspects here. The first aspect is the white guilt from these governments around the world, and they might not have to be white. I'm just using it because a lot of people know the term, but a lot of governments wanted to ensure that they overcompensate for their lack of responding when it needed to be responded to. Fighting apartheid in the 70s and 80s. I mean, pretty much nothing happened there. And then what you will find is you'll find from the other aspect, it is the ANC knowing what true suffering is like, and then knowing what true freedom is like in the sense that they could do no wrong. So they could go and meet with terrorists, and people would say, Nelson Mandela famously said that just because you disagree with somebody doesn't mean that he's my enemy. My friends might be your enemies, or he said something along those lines. And I believe that is, in essence, why the ANC has gone down this path, where they feel that their friends during apartheid might have had ulterior motives, eventually knowing down the line things would change. But the ANC couldn't realize that. And then also, the Western governments that allowed the ANC to do what they wanted to do. I mean, you can't tell me that Europe and the United States and, Canada didn't know about these race-based policies in South Africa for the last 20 years. You can't tell me that they weren't aware of the fact that we've got...
Well, it was international sanctions that brought South Africa finally, or the apartheid government finally to its knees.
Yeah. Look what's happening now.
Yeah. Well, here's a little story I want to tell you, and I'll get your reaction on it. And I'm trying to get you to understand how things are viewed from afar. One tries to have a kind of a helicopter view on this whole thing. I remember about a week before the first democratic elections in South Africa, I had dinner in my house here in Amsterdam with the then head of the African National Congress here in the Netherlands. I need not to mention any names. And I remember we were sitting around the dinner table, and he smiled at me and he said to me, the election is around the corner. We'll take the government. And then he turned around to me and he said, and now it will be our time, my brother, to eat. I'll never forget those words.
Yeah.
I'll elaborate a little bit because I ended up going to South Africa at his cost to make a wedding portrait for him. And I'll never forget the scene outside Johannesburg. This was about 2-3 weeks into democracy in South Africa. New democracy. The Rainbow Nation had just been created. And I just remember being at this wedding sermon that took place outside in the koppies of Johannesburg. And I remember the African sun setting on this open field. And all I could see was just the dust being kicked up by one Mercedes-Benz after another Mercedes-Benz, followed by a BMW or an Audi 3 or whatever the case might have been. And these awfully well-dressed black ladies stepping out of the cars into this little dusty road in the open field, saying they'd just returned from Paris or from London or New York. And the only thought that went through there was a marquee set out for at least about 1,000 guests. And the question that came to my mind was, where does the money come from? Where did the money come from?
Yeah.
So that's an important. I just think that's a very important thing to keep in mind when we talk about the state of South Africa today.
Let me double down on that quickly. Okay. Let me. So you giving me an example that of back in the day. Yeah. The same question can be applied to the ANC. I mean, remember before the elections, the ANC was close to bankrupt. There was this company that I believe, the number escapes me now, but it was a ludicrous amount of money. I think it was 100 million rand or more that the ANC owed this company for printing their posters and various things that they needed, the material that they needed for the election. And they had to settle with this company because they were already being told by the courts that the company could go in and tie the things to the assets or look at the assets, and suddenly out of the blue the ANC managed to settle that massive amount of money. And then even now, if you look at it, it's 1 year, well, almost a year after the last election, and the ANC is doing perfectly fine now. So how do you go from on the brink of bankruptcy, where you can't pay 100 million rand for your posters that need to be printed for the election, to what they have now? And once again, the question is, who funded it? Now, the question is, and this is very conspiracy theory, but you have to look at everything that's in front of you. Why did the ANC suddenly decide that they need to take Israel to the ICJ? And then why suddenly is the ANC best friends with Iran? And why is Iran coming into South Africa meeting with ANC officials? There are many of these examples. So, do I believe that there are people behind the curtains or people that are the puppet masters? Definitely. Without a shadow of a doubt, there is a force behind the curtain that is controlling what's happening. And unfortunately, it looks like that same force has infiltrated mainstream media in South Africa.
Now let me fill in the story here for you as well. Then we're saying exactly the same thing. I know a lot of people. I know probably one of the most disliked people in South Africa is a man called Carl Niehaus, who you might know or not know as well. Carl used to be...
I've got a different name for his surname, though, but I won't say it yet.
Mr. Niehaus was our ambassador here in Holland, so I got to know him quite well. Be it as it may, whether one likes him or not like him, he was present at the time. And this is something that he told me once in a conversation that amazed him. And this is I'm just adding this to try to create a picture of where we come from in terms of the creation of our new democracy. During the Codesa days, he said the African National Congress people, negotiators, would arrive in taxis and buses or whatever that took them out to Kempton Park or wherever. I think Codesa was in Kempton Park. First week, they would all arrive in little old cars or in taxis or whatever the case might be. And he said it was remarkable about 2 weeks or 3 weeks into the discussion. Suddenly, the little taxis and little old cars that would take them
into BMWs
turned into chauffeur-driven Mercedes-Benzes and BMWs. My suggestion here is that these are the things that probably would be the first little cells that were created, that would grow into seeds that were planted, that would grow into this monster that we end up with, where the ANC, like a bunch of vulgar creatures, would hit the trough, to say it in very uncouth way. My question is, if there's only 10% of truth in what I'm saying now, how do we get out of that? How do we build a nation in South Africa?
Well, the good thing is that the vast majority of people in this country do not support the ANC. If you look at the election results. The problem, however, is that if you look at the EFF, if you look at the factions that broke away from the ANC and you add that up, you still get about 62 to 63% of people that believe in communism, that believe in socialism, even though the leaders live the best lives of capitalism that you've ever seen. The height of irony...
Best communists in the world.
Yeah, the height of irony has always been for me when I was a councillor in Nelson Mandela Bay, or for my 3 months when I was a member of parliament, you would see an EFF cadre or an MK cadre complaining about capitalism whilst sitting in front of their iPad or their MacBook Pro, that was built by the biggest capitalist country in the world, Apple. The thing that I can tell you is it's what eventually happens to every country or every organization that believes communism or socialism is the answer. Eventually, they run out of other people's money. And that is what we saw happening now. The fact that the ANC can't tax the middle income or the middle class and the upper class more anymore, because they will then just pick up their things and leave, and then they lose that tax bracket. That is why the VAT increases is so contentious at the moment, because now the ANC is pretty much left with taxing the poor in order to survive, because if they tax the rich more, they leave, and then everything collapses. So it's only a matter of time before people's eyes hopefully open and they realize that suddenly their social grants aren't being paid on time anymore, or they've had to reduce the amount of social grants, because 28 million people in this country are dependent on social grants, and there's only 7.1 million taxpayers that pay. There are, I think it's 23 million taxpayers that are registered, but only 7.1 million taxpayers actually foot the bill for these social grants. So eventually you run out of other people's money. And that is what's happening right now. So unfortunately, you know, political parties like the DA, the Freedom Front Plus, even Action SA, all of these parties whose focus is black individuals, but they want to support capitalism, where they failed is they never reached the individuals in the rural communities, because that is the ANC's heart and soul, is the rural communities, the people that are reliant on them, the people that can't get a proper education. So in typical communism fashion, you keep them uneducated so that they don't know that there are better things for them out there, and that they deserve more. So in a nutshell, the fact that they're running out of money now and they're having to start taxing the poor through VAT, that is going to hit people very hard. I mean, it was yesterday where the ANC, and this was, I mean, I covered that live stream of, the budget being approved. And I won't forget the fact that after it was approved that 0.5% VAT increase is going to kick into effect, the ANC all jumped up and they cheered and they were singing and they're dancing. And I think a lot of people are saying, why are you singing and dancing with the fact that you've just punished the poorest of the poor, and they will be paying more for things tomorrow than what they paid for it yesterday? So their mask is slipping, is what I'm trying to say.
It's also the most important thing in the country. Here's the question. I read the other day that if we want, Pete Crocombe told me the other day that something like 80-90% of young school leavers, young qualified people, will never be able to in their lifetime enter the formal market. The statistics is something like between 50 and 60% of South Africa's people live under the poverty line. If I'm correct. I think it's 55%. By the way, during the time of apartheid, it was about 50%. It's gone up since apartheid, which of course is a great irony in itself.
But you see, the problem is that you're not allowed to discuss that. You're not allowed to mention that without being criticized by. And I can't, to the viewers, I can't stress this enough. Mainstream media in South Africa has failed, not only South Africa, but the world, in telling the world what is happening and what's going on here. So I will hammer that in. I mean, if I haven't said it 10 times, then please add it in post-edit and just put it randomly, because that is exactly what's happening in South Africa, is that the vast majority of South Africans do not feel the way that mainstream media is portraying them as feeling.
The vast majority of South Africans are living under the breadline. That's the most important point to keep in mind, and that's a statistical fact. We've got 4 or 5 years before the next election. I wonder what this government of national unity will be able to achieve in terms of bringing down unemployment in South Africa in real terms and dealing with the enormous poverty in South Africa. What's your view on what's going to happen when that doesn't happen?
nothing's going to change over the next 5 years because the ANC has not given up. They haven't realized that they're not the majority party anymore. That's the big thing. They think that the voters made a mistake. They believe that, okay, we as the ANC need to get back to our roots, and we need to become more radical and really get behind the radical economic transformation. And that is why you're seeing these bills being passed by Cyril Ramaphosa, the Expropriation Act, the Bella Act, which pretty much allows Afrikaans to completely go down from the second most spoken language in South Africa to almost nothing, because there are many ways to skin a cat, and the Bella Act is one of them, to teach Afrikaners a lesson and Afrikaans people. And then you've got the NHI, which is just not possible. The national health insurance for those overseas that might be watching. So I'm assuming that some countries in Europe has got access to government hospitals. And even though I've heard good things, there are many that still complain about the quality of healthcare, even with these state hospitals. Now, imagine in a country where you have the broader definition of unemployment. You've got 50%, 45%, half of the country unemployed, not being able to pay for medical aid, not being able to pay tax, not being able to contribute to the fiscus of the country. And now suddenly most of them are going to get access to private hospitals, and the doctors. The thing is, they haven't worked out how they are going to fund this and pay the doctors and pay the hospitals, but they want to enforce it. So, I mean, I'm all for giving everybody, quality healthcare. But if you look at the state of state hospitals in this country, and I don't want to be too vulgar, but there is literal feces, yesterday's blood, and yesterday's urine that is lying in that room that they are now pushing you into, and you've got stab wounds or you've got bullet wounds. And I imagine those mixing. And that is why the mortality rate is so high in state hospitals. But the point that I'm getting to is just that they want to implement policies in this country to be more radical so that they can get those votes back and the support back, because they think that MK being radical is what gave them the percentage, and the EFF being radical is what gave them the percentage. What they don't seem to realize is that more and more people aren't actually voting because they don't believe in what the political parties are selling. And to just answer you very briefly, after a very long explanation, the GNU won't work because the opposition parties are too busy fighting amongst each other. And a perfect example of this is yesterday, where Action SA under Herman Mashaba, who once used to be a very capitalist individual and suddenly changed to be very radical and supporting Julius Malema and EFF policy. So going from and the irony, of course, is that he's a multi-millionaire businessman that goes from a capitalist to supporting complete socialist policies. So it's the ANC thinking that they're still in charge, and secondly, it's the opposition parties that can't work together in order to ensure that the ANC is put in place.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm not an economist, but I do know, and I've read, and I've got it confirmed by people that know, that if we want to deal with the levels of poverty in South Africa, we will have for a number of years be able to reach a economic growth of something like 8%. I think our economic growth in South Africa is something like 0.5, 0.6%. It seems
we're lucky.
It seems like the impossibility. It seems like an impossibility to achieve. My question is, what's going to happen 5 years from now, in your view? Will the GNU, if it survives, or whatever will be in its place, will it be able to affect the situation to the extent that one will be able to keep the EFF and the Incompetence parties out of government?
Yes. What I believe is going to happen, in my opinion, is I believe that the political parties know who to target now and what they need to tell these individuals. And especially, over the next 5 years, a lot can happen with technology. Why do you think the ANC is so hell-bent on not allowing Starlink to come to South Africa? It's because they know then that provides internet access to rural communities, which means people can go off of the SABC, the state broadcaster that feeds them the information that they need to know, and they can get their own information. So when and there's a massive migration of young black professionals that go to the metros and they go to the cities and work, and then over a long weekend or during the holidays they move back to the rural communities and spend time with their friends and family. Now, if we can get the technology aspect to that level where rural communities can get access to whatever they want to know, then there's going to be a drastic shift. And there has been a shift to, if you look at specifically on social media, the argument always used to be it's apartheid's fault. The argument used to be then it's colonialism's fault. And now the ANC can't get away with those arguments anymore because people go, you've had 31 years. Why aren't we in a better situation, not only as a black individual, but why aren't we in a better situation because as a country with the unemployment rate and, with the crime rate and all of these things? So there's definitely a shift, but it's not going to be a party like the Democratic Alliance. It's not going to be a party like the EFF, because the EFF is losing support. And Mkonto sees where they are fighting so much amongst each other that I would be surprised if they still exist as an entity in the next 5 years. So it's not going to be the EFF, it's not going to be MK. What might happen is the ANC might lose even more support, and I think that might be when the penny drops that, oh wait, communism in actual fact doesn't work. And then you're going to see a lot of people wake up and go, okay, I need to look after my interests. I need to look after my lifestyle. So I'm willing to negotiate in order to either remain a member of parliament, because this is another thing, and I'm sorry if I'm taking up too much time, but I can go into detail. In South Africa, your average politician, I don't think that overseas they would be trusted to run a tuck shop because not because they're corrupt or because of the incompetence. Now, if you look at what a politician earns comparatively to what a person in the private sector earn for the same amount of work, you can't even begin to fathom how unequal it is.
Highest paid parliament in the world.
Exactly. So if you are going to reward people to become politically active at university, which is what happens, and my biggest wish in South Africa is that these political parties are not allowed to campaign or to have student organizations, because what is happening is a lot of people get access to the university based on, the various different funds that they get access to as a black individual, colored individual, or Indian individual. And then what happens is they know they're not going to make it because maybe they don't have the capacity to really be at university, or because they're just lazy. Now they suddenly get face-to-face airtime with Floyd Shivambu or Julius Malema, somebody that they look up to, and they go, listen, there might be a future in politics for you. And then what you get is you get the below average level individual that gets paid 100,000 Rand a month as a member of parliament. And that is a big problem, is that you've got the least qualified people that are running the most important levers of government. That is the problem.
I must confess, I watched a little film the other day on YouTube where I saw some members of the EFF going into attack mode in Parliament, and it was so disgusting to view that it affronted my sense of decency and humanity. I was really quite offended by that this is playing out in South Africa's parliament. We've gone a little bit off the point that I wanted to get to. I've taken a lot of your time already. I want to just get back to this point. The question that I started out with, based on most recent events, Trump's executive order, AfriForum's actions, what's his name? Aaron's Roots creating his new organization, calls for Cape exit, and against all of that backdrop, my question is, do you think and believe, or can you say in any way, that the experiment of the multicultural democracy in South Africa has succeeded / failed?
Under the ANC, it has failed tremendously.
Okay.
Do I think that we could have had a better outcome if we were governed by a political party that were more aligned with what is in the best interest of South Africa? I believe it would have worked out very differently. And the reason I say this is because of the day-to-day interactions we have in this country. And it's not just pertaining to somebody that is working and they have to be friendly towards me. It's when, you walk across the street and an individual stops and you look and, oh, it's a black individual. Or you see somebody that is struggling to carry, and before you can see it, there's a white individual or a black individual helping somebody carry their stuff to the car. It's these these small gestures of kindness that tells me that this would have worked if we had the right people in charge from the start. And unfortunately, we don't. So under the EFF, it won't work. Under MK, it won't work. Under the ANC, it won't work. Under any political party that wants to implement communism and socialism, it won't work. But if we...
What you said there, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it's important. What you said here, though, is that under these parties, no, but you're really also saying under the people, yes. In other words, you talk about the goodwill on the street, the friendly gesture that you get, greeting somebody, somebody helping you, carrying your grocery bag, or whatever the case might be. Based on those sort of interactions, is your belief that there is hope for the creation of a nation out of the diverse, different cultural and ethnic groups in South Africa?
Without a doubt, because remember, it's so much more than just race. It also boils down then to the various cultures that you get. White individuals, for instance, you get two. You get the Afrikaners and you get the British. And then under the black individuals, you got Xhosa, Zulu, Venda, Sotho, Tswana. You've got various different cultures. So it's not just race. It's also cultural beliefs that you have. And it's once you explore the country, like once you get in your car, and hopefully you don't get murdered along the way. So there's a lot of asterisks, like if you manage to survive,
cynical, but
if you manage to survive, it's actually a beautiful country, and that is why you see so many people fighting for this country, and that is what annoys me, is that the reason that AfriForum and Solidariteit went overseas is because they don't want to immigrate. Or they don't want to seek refugee status in the United States. They love South Africa. They believe in South Africa. The only thing that is stopping South Africa from actually being what everybody wanted it to be, including South Africans, is the government. That is the biggest problem that we are facing.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you this question, and I think that we're going to have to close down. And this is going to be, unfortunately, very cynical. I hear what you say, and what you say gives me, as a South African who lives far abroad, gives me an enormous amount of positive hope for the future. At the same time, though, it seems to me, and that's the answer I get from just about everybody that I speak to, we have failed to, at the very minimum, after 30 years of democracy in South Africa, to create any form of social integration in South Africa. And then I'll talk about absolutely on zero level. There exists no genuine social integration in South Africa, according to just about every single person that I talk to, and simply the facts of South Africa. That's kind of a big question mark when you then embrace the idea of the oneness of this, in idealistic terms, Desmond Tutu's rainbow nation. Whilst the truth of the day is that, and it happens on school level already. I spoke to a black singer the other day who sings a fantastic Afrikaner song, and who told me also about how separation almost automatically happens, not in primary school, but the moment when the kids start hitting secondary school, high school level, and so on. You've got your group of Zulu kids, you've got your group of Afrikaans kids, you've got your group of English kids, etc., etc. Social integration, everybody tells me, is just about zero.
So I would say that that is mostly due to, what is currently happening in South Africa from the media's perspective in indoctrinating people. Then the government telling, that it's fine to sing kill the boer, kill the farmer. So what has happened is, and this, what you are saying is 100% correct. But what you need to understand is that it's the parents and the friends are the two biggest influences of how a young mind develops. And what I can say without a shadow of a doubt is if I just compare my school years, which I would say was exactly like you described, white people over here, the colored kids over there, black kids over there. What you can see, especially if you go to a lot of school meetings or, sporting events, you can see the integration taking place there. The problem that we are facing, though, is the parents and the older brother, as an example, because the young South Africans really do want to, they don't, I know this sounds so cringy, but it's true. They don't see race. They don't. Up until their parents tell them, or their older brother tell them, or when they go out to university, they are forced to, either fit in with this DASO crew or the EFF crew or the ANC crew. And then that radicalizes that individual into start thinking that way. And I think I have more insight into this because I've been in the political space, I've been in the university space, and also, having or going to school meets and seeing how it is on the young stage. I see it growing as such. But what you are saying is true. What needs to happen in order to prevent this is that the parents need to start indoctrinating or stop indoctrinating their children, and mainstream media needs to do the same. Is that going to happen? Time will tell. Yeah. But if we're going down the path we are going down now, then you're going to see this country turn into Zimbabwe. I think there's going to be, at my personal take, is I believe at least 250,000 to 500,000 people will take up Trump's offer to seek refugee status in the United States. And that is going to see a massive chunk of tax money move out of this country. And I'm not trying to stereotype and say it's only white people that pay tax. Of course not. But, if you have to believe the ANC and the EFF, 7% of the population makes most of the money. And according to them, it's white people. So if you use that rationale, then they are going to lose billions upon billions of rands of tax money. And how are they going to, plug the holes? Yeah. Okay. So they need to understand, and they do understand, that they need to do something in order to turn this around. And hopefully the next 3 to 4 years will see that transition taking place. And it's also, and I mean, we are called the miracle because we were at a point where it was a civil war was almost guaranteed in South Africa. And if you look at South Africa's got this way of things really need to get really bad before it gets better. And I feel that we've reached that point. I feel with the risk of expropriation without compensation, with the race-based laws that we have in this country, and how it's just reflecting how apartheid used to be, and how the similarities of that is showcasing, not necessarily in how belittling and insulting it was directly towards black people, but how the policies are reflecting a race-based approach. The ANC realizes that they need to change something very quickly, or in the next 3 or 4 years, the people that vote for them, the poor people, are not going to be able to get their social grants. And then who do these individuals turn against? They turn against the political party.
Renaldo, I'm gonna do one. I'm gonna push in one last little question, just for fun.
No problem.
Just to let you and I, for one moment, piss off, if I may use a crude term, a lot of people now by asking you the following question. You're an Afrikaner, I'm an Afrikaner. What is it that Aaron's Roots or Solidarity or AfriForum wants for the Afrikaner that the Afrikaner doesn't have today. And yes, I don't want to go into the details about the Bella law. I understand that fully and comprehensively, and I think that's a battle to be battled. But what is it that people like Aaron's Roots specifically can bring us as a people that we don't have yet?
I believe okay, so I can't speak on behalf of him, but I've interacted with him a lot.
I hope you understand
I do.
I'm being very cynical at the moment, but
I do. I believe that what the Afrikaner want is just their identity back, and not to be seen as, because remember, the Afrikaner eventually, with the Dutch, the French, and the Germans arriving in 1695 and onwards, and even the British in 1820, the Afrikaner was always just wanting their own identity and their own little place under the sun. Yeah. That is why in 1695, Jan van Riebeeck arrived here. It's because they wanted to get away from where they were because of whatever. The French Huguenots arrived here because of religious persecution. So all of them arrived here and they wanted their own little place under the sun that they could call their own. And I believe that is what the Afrikaner wants. And look, they really got it wrong under apartheid. But even apartheid as a system, you could see what they wanted to do. They wanted to separate themselves and say, we are this unique little culture in the southern tip of Africa. There's nobody that speaks our language outside of this country back then. And our culture needs to be protected. And that is what I believe what needs to happen and probably wants to happen is that the Afrikaner just wants to get the identity back, and they want to celebrate their culture without having to feel guilty because of things that were done in the past.
There's a dichotomy. I mean, there's a dichotomy, and that's part of why one is so confused about South Africa, because I can hear you as Afrikaner recognizing that call for, and that is also a true sense of freedom, the freedom to be one's own culture, to live within your own culture. I don't know if a geographic space of land is then attached to that ideal or not, but it does actually clash with the idea of the dream that you are at the same time fighting for, namely the multicultural ideal of South Africa, the rainbow nation. It's an either or an or. And how do you, and what I'm trying to, I suppose the core question is really is how does one give, how do you frame it? How do you create it? What is it that needs to be created to give you that sense of your own identity or your own space, if it's not based on a piece of land like an Urania, for example?
Well, it's having your culture respected in the sense that you aren't belittled or insulted when you want to sing a song or when you want to, call it Bride Day.
Does that happen? Does that really, truly happen?
Does what happen?
Is Afrikaans being belittled in South Africa or being trampled on in that sense?
Well, yes, the Bella Act makes that very clear that they want to limit.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
So the Bella Act is there to pretty much destroy Afrikaans as a language in school. That is the ultimate goal. Look, I mean, it's hidden in a lot of subtext, but if you just read it as a lay
I get
person,
that.
You'll find that.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, so remember, there's also various dichotomies when it comes to this. I mean, I am an Afrikaner. I grew up as an Afrikaner, but then I married an English girl, and I spent my university years, in English. I had to graduate at an English university. So I would say out of my average day, I probably speak Afrikaans 10% of the time. So you also evolve. But that is, I think, what might take away from the aspect of what I'm also saying. I understand why Afrikaners that only speak Afrikaans, that only want to celebrate their culture, they want their own little space under the sun, whether it's a physical place or just a safe space, if you will, where they can do this without being criticized, belittled, or insulted, or even threatened. I mean, Kill the Boer is such a blatant song that is talking about killing an Afrikaner, because the term Boer, for the Dutch that might not understand, it's not a direct translation to
Yeah,
farmer.
no, I get that.
It means the Afrikaans culture.
Yeah.
So,
but I will also
completely-
just say this to you, if you don't mind, if I just to interrupt you here. The irony in all of this is that all of these things that you mentioned now, space for your own language, respect for your own language, has been realized actually upon democracy, at the point at which we became a democracy. There are more books being published in Afrikaans than ever before, more Afrikaans music than ever before, more Afrikaans television than ever before. Afrikaans has never lived like this and free to live like this as ever before. And what set Afrikaans free was the day when apartheid collapsed. Literally the day after apartheid collapsed, the Afrikaner was a celebrated being around the world. We were the most celebrated people because we gave up on the power. So the idea that, and I understand, I'm not talking about kill the Boer, and I'm not talking about those kind of features of what you're being confronted with, but in terms of your space to live your culture and to speak your language, and once again, I understand the Bella law and what that implies as well. But I think we do have to acknowledge that one of the major things that set Afrikaans free was in fact the ending of apartheid and South Africa being normalized within the international community.
I would agree with you to an extent. I would agree with you up until the mid 2000s, maybe towards the end of earlier 2010s, when the ANC, and I need to politicize it because that is the way in which you can understand it. When policies started being implemented and excuses being made as to why the ANC is not succeeding in uplifting more people out of poverty and not stealing as much money and not being as corrupt, they would constantly reference apartheid. They would constantly reference the white man. I mean, Cyril Ramaphosa famously in Parliament attacked a white young MP by saying, but you benefited from apartheid and you celebrated apartheid and you caused apartheid. And he told that to an individual whose family was part of the Black Sash, who had their family imprisoned because they were fighting apartheid. So the point that I'm making is I agree with you, but that went very south very quickly when the ANC was pushed into a corner by the international community and by South Africans to saying what's going on. And then that is when the excuses started happening. And a lot of the international community and woke culture that I would say has now existed for about 10 years, you would see that has developed out of it, where they go, oh, it's white privilege. And when they say white privilege, they also mean Afrikaner privilege, you know? That narrative
this is really new liberal, almost kind of Marxist ideas that are being forced upon the Western world by elite governments.
And that is very powerful. So I agree with you, but don't underestimate the power that has had. I mean, you look at the BLM movement in the United States. That all came from the Rhodes Must Fall movement in South Africa. And then obviously in South Africa, when you talk about whiteness or white privilege, then of course the person at the top of that pedestal is the Afrikaner, because the Afrikaner is the one that caused the apartheid. The Afrikaner is this and that. So I would agree with you for a little window period of time, but then that has gone south very, very quickly.
I'm going to end by saying to you that you will be surprised if I tell you that. And my Dutch friends might find this offensive, but that if I go right now to a funding organization to support a project of mine or whatever the case might be, if I was a crippled black lesbian homosexual, I would stand in front of the row. And please, now don't throw stones at me. I mean it with a sense of humor. But I have seen here, even in Afrikaners in South Africa, I think we're the epicenter of this whole thing. But it plays itself out even here in the capitals of Europe as well. Renaldo Gouws, thank you very, very much. What a privilege. Thank you very much. I hope that we are going to come back and do more of this.
Definitely. Thank you for having me, and I really do appreciate it. And perhaps in the next episode, if people are interested enough, we can actually delve into a little bit as to why I was removed from Parliament. I think that is a discussion definitely worth having to show the double standards of racism in South Africa.
Yeah,
And perhaps
yeah.
if enough people are interested, we can have that discussion.
I'm certainly very interested, Ronaldo. Thank you very, very much. Baie dankie. Ons gaan gou weer gesels. Baie dankie.
100%.